As I said earlier, I handpicked this episode. I let my guests choose their own articles ahead of time, and I've been left with the first one to introduce. So here we go. This was published on Tuesday, the 29th of November in The Guardian by Robert Booth, Pamela Duncan, and Carmen Aguilar Garcia. This has been all over the news since it first emerged. England and Wales are now minority Christian countries. I think sometimes our friends in America might forget we over here have a state religion, or more correctly, in England there is an established church state. States church, church state. My speaking is fantastic today. Great show to introduce. And that many countries have established churches or religion, and not all of them are theistic. Also, and very importantly for our American Christian friends who think that sneaking religion into government and schools will suddenly make everyone good Christians, as this story will demonstrate, this isn't necessarily the case. I'm going to hand this one over to Richard.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. It's been coming for a long time. I actually think we have been less Christian than they think for a while, because for a long time when the census was taken, people would put what they culturally thought they were, which was often Christian, even if they didn't believe in God. But the parents are Christian, the grandparents are Christian, they went to church as kids, and they went to a Church of England school, all that stuff. So it's really not that surprising that we've got this finally, due to a lot of work from humanists in this country. People have been putting that they aren't religious, and it's the biggest group. Yay, it's great. Long may it continue. And just the irony of us having a state church, church state, state church religion, and being irreligious, I think is fantastic, is palpable. And we are technically a theocracy, and yet none of us believe in God, which is, we'll get to that later, and how that affects our government. But yeah, it's not a surprise, given the way the stats were going, and given the hard works of the head of Humanists UK, Andrew Copston, who spent the last decade, as far as I know, going, please put no religion in your census. So yeah, fantastic.
Phoebe.
This is where I get to have a little bit of a rant about the census itself.
Yeah.
Why are we sending out questionnaires every 10 years that contain, I quote, 51 different questions? To you Americans, I looked up your census. It's 10 questions. It's one side of A4 paper. One side of A4 paper. If you get a book with the census, it's 19 pages long, and each member of your household has to fill it out individually. So here's the elevator pitch for the census. I know. I've got a great idea. Let's send out to every single household in the country 50-odd questions so that we can find out exactly what's going on this special day, so that we can then turn out the country and we know what to do with it. Oh, and if they don't do it, there's a fine of up to £50,000. What absolute nonsense! If you pitched that to somebody, they'd go, get out of town, mate. But getting back to this question on the census, and it's given us this lovely set of results. This is a compulsory question on the census. You have to put an answer down, or else they will put an answer down for you, which defaults to Christianity. Which is a lot of people don't realize. If you do not answer the questions on the British census that are mandatory, they'll put answers in for you, which are the default answers. So, whilst it may be tempting to just go, oh, I'm boycotting this religious question, etc., etc., don't do that, because they'll default you to being a Christian. But it is interesting to see that Christianity is still put down as the plurality religion, but it doesn't break down what strand of God knows how many denominations of Christianity, and how many of those are actually still the established church, or how many of those are Methodist, or how many of those are Catholic, or how many of those are whatever other flavour of Christianity you can come up with today. And I'm not quite sure how many other flavours of Christianity there are, Emma, but how many are there?
You're asking me? I don't know, too many to count. But it's interesting that as soon as it gets into it's like the census is like Christianity, and then no religion, and then it's like other. And that's it's like Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, everything else is categorized into other. I don't know, I kind of like this. I like the census. I like I like the heavy data load, but I quite like filling in forms.
Yeah.
So sorry, Phoebe. I'm like uber prepared for this because I actually talked about this today on my own channel. So I'm like, stop me if I get boring. I did want to just point out for people at home who don't know much about the census, because a lot of interesting personalities have been slightly misusing and misunderstanding the stats. So it's important to remember that Christianity is still the majority religion. We have a minority majority, so less than 50% and plurality. I can't even say
A plurality.
Plurality.
Yeah.
We've discovered a word that I can't say.
It's first past the post. We've got first past the post religion now.
First past the Pope.
No, first past the Archbishop of Canterbury.
First past the Archbishop of Canterbury. But yeah, and the kind of thing that I think, I mean, it's really interesting. It's really great. The kind of thing that I thought was interesting, and Reverend Stephen Cottrell is mentioned saying this in the article. We've left behind the era where people almost automatically identified as Christian, which is kind of what Rich touched on earlier. I would hazard a guess that census data still reflects a lot of people who do sort of, Christians by default, as it were. People who were raised in nominally Christian households but aren't very active or aren't inclined to ever pick up the Bible or even own a Bible, but they identify that way because they were baptized or something like that. So I hope that secularism continues to rise and we can continue to convince people that don't really have any faith to put no religion on the forms. Yeah,
definitely. Stephen Cottrell's, who is the Archbishop of York, made some very interesting comments on this. I'm going to come to the one Emma's just mentioned in a moment, but the first one that he mentions in the article is that he said that the census results throw down a challenge to us, not only to trust that God will build his kingdom on earth, but also to play our part in making Christ known. And I found that really peculiar. I felt like saying, which is it, Steve? Are you trusting God to do it, or are you working for the goal yourself? And he followed this, as Emma said, with an attempt to create a self-fulfilling prophecy, with a wonderful example of a Barnum statement, by the way, when he said, "We have left behind the era when many people almost automatically identify as Christian, but other surveys consistently show that the same people still seek spiritual truth and wisdom and a set of values to live by." So, yes, Steve, you've kind of addressed almost every human on the planet there, whether they've got a faith or a set of spiritual beliefs or merely a secular moral system. I'm not sure what that's
people that
got to
engage
do.
in woo. I engage in woo,
I don't
Stephen.
know what that's got to do with, particularly with Christianity. I appreciate the comment, but you've essentially just said nobody wants to be Christian, but surveys show that people are still human beings. That's awesome. I absolutely agree. Yeah. I think the technical term for what he just did is clutching at straws. Rich?
Yeah, I actually think what I love about that sentence is it's a tacit admission that you don't need religion to be moral. He's actually said, I've shocked people. He's actually gone and said it. And he's right. He's absolutely right. You don't need religion to be moral at all. The spiritual bit confuses me. I still don't quite know what that means. I mean, I've had some damn fine chocolate cake and got close. But other than that, I'm not sure what spiritual is. So are people seeking spiritual, or are they just seeking happiness, calmness, a good life? Is that what that is? What's spiritual? Phoebe, what's spiritual?
Bloody hell do I know? Was it
you
the
look
best
wise.
sex I've ever had? That might be spiritual. I might have found like an upper plateau on this.
Well, I thought earlier
I definitely didn't find spirituality at my bar mitzvah. I definitely didn't find it there.
I thought at the match earlier may have experienced something like it. You could.
The match is a bit dull. What I will say is I did come across a spiritual football experience on the 30th of July this year at Wembley Stadium when England beat Germany 2-1 in the Women's Euros final. I did come close there, especially because I had my Scottish friend who came with me and refused to wear an England shirt, so I bought her a Germany shirt and went, you will support a team. But the other thing that this is missing here in the data, when you actually drill down into the data, is that other religions that aren't Christianity are getting bigger. Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Sikhism, they are growing. They have gone up in numbers. It's only really Christianity that has gone and has shrunk. Whereas if you look at the numbers of Jews in the UK, number of Muslims in the UK, those numbers have gone up. So it's not a case of people necessarily becoming less religious. It's people becoming more aware of saying, this is my religion. I can say this is my religion. And then saying, well, actually, I have no religion and I'm happy to say I've got no religion. But the biggest drop in the number of in religious identification in the UK is unfortunately Jedis. They have dropped off entirely. And I know that will be a real disappointment to Emma. So Emma, are you still a Jedi or have you ever been a Jedi?
I've never been a Jedi. I've got a book about the Jedi, the real religion. I think I've also got a book comparing the Jedi to Christianity written by a Christian. Because those are the sort of books that line my shelves.
Because that's the Christian thing to do. Just compare, George Lucas creations to, creations 2,000 years ago.
You joke. It's been done.
Probably more than once.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It has been. I was just wondering, like, maybe that is what the Reverend is talking about when he says, people are seeking spirituality sort of elsewhere. Maybe it's almost like a subtle, we're losing them to the other religions. And I thought it's interesting that stuff like, it's not just the other sort of mainstream religions, it's stuff like, Wicca and paganism, modern paganism and shamanism and stuff. Shamanism, I don't think is even technically a religion. It's just a sort of spiritual practice. It's definitely not theistic. But a lot of sort of, I guess you would say woo is kind of on the rise. And I kind of am all for that. Because, like, if you look at modern paganism and Wicca, and everyone I know who's ever been involved in any of that, they're basically just like, they wear floaty clothes and drink a lot of tea. And I'm like, if people are leaving mainstream churches to make a lot of tea and respect the planet, I'm okay with that as a concept.
The real question is, what's in their tea? What is in their tea? That's what I want to know. Because if they're getting some, if they're getting some floaty hedonistic experience from their tea, maybe I want some of that tea.
In the 60s, they actually used to have tea parties where they put sugar in the tea to hide the taste of LSD. So that's a sure sign of something fun going along if someone's taking sugar in their tea, as far as I'm concerned. I want to slightly push back against Emma a little bit there. I think that the census doesn't give us information on supernatural beliefs in general, and it just meant that we have less Christians. And I think I've mentioned this before, that people being less Christian or coming out of Christianity doesn't mean necessarily that they've got rid of supernatural views. And I think, some of these things are non-theistic, some of them are non-supernatural, but there are also those that do have supernatural ideas in them. And I'm sure every member of this panel will probably know lots and lots of people that believe in ghosts and other things like that. And just because you don't have a religion, it doesn't mean that, people don't have supernatural ideas and things. Yeah. And I think that's something that when I've seen this covered, and especially when I've seen this covered by kind of atheist or humanist sources, I've seen people shouting this headline from the rooftops that, not Britain, that England and Wales is now a minority Christian religion and countries. And I think it's a mistake to get too excited by this, because people do still have supernatural beliefs. People still do have supernatural ideas, and we've still got a long way to go. And religion in and of itself is not the only enemy of critical thinking and skepticism. Traditional religious belief declining where it is, because it's not everywhere, does not mean that these people have given up religious or spiritual ideas altogether. There are lots of other articles that we'll try and get linked in the description below that demonstrate this. And there was one where a Dr. Heidi Campbell, professor in religious studies at Texas A&M University, told us that one of the largest percentage increases comes from groups that are spiritual but not affiliated with a specific religious community. And the same article suggests that decline in church membership is happening alongside a growing number of conspiracy thinking and conspiracy theories. So we do have something to celebrate here. But the outstanding victory I think we can take from this is the decrease in an institutional level in Christianity. And I think we might talk about that a little bit further. But if Rich wants to go next and respond to that.
Just very quickly, I was going to say, I spent half my life in the entertainment industry and I work with dancers. And every single one of them, one of the first questions they ask when they meet me is, what star sign are you? To which I usually say, I'm a skepticon, which they don't like very much. But yeah, it's everywhere in my world, everywhere. And most of them don't believe in God, but they do believe in Taurus.
As a dancer myself, I would not answer you that question. But then again, I am a classical ballet dancer, but
there are a few, but mostly I get, yeah.
Okay, so final thoughts, Richard. Give us your final thoughts on the article.
It's interesting. It's interesting that basically it's saying something that we've kind of known all along, that people are moving from Christianity. One thing I was going to ask as well, they're saying they're moving it, that the other religions are growing. Does that necessarily mean they're religions? Because every Jewish person I've ever met's been an atheist, bizarrely. So, is that actually the case?
I'll rant about that later. I'll rant about that later.
I'll leave you for that. But yes, so are they grid? But yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. And yes, people are moving on to superstitions. I think a lot of people go through a process of they move away from God and they move into tarot cards. And then one of these days they realize tarot cards are ridiculous and they do something else. It's kind of a progress thing. You hang on to this supernatural element. So I've still got hope there even. But yeah, it's very interesting article. And by the way, what are the censuses for? Historians like me to pour through in 100 years. That's what they're for.
Phoebe, final thoughts.
That's not a good enough reason to waste everyone's time.
Yes, it is.
That's not a good enough reason to waste everyone's time. Yeah, it was great that Emmeline Pankhurst was found in some closet in some room in the House of Commons or something, but she was counted twice, for goodness sakes. But anyway, that's beside the point. 51 questions is a little bit absurd, especially when one of the questions only appears in Welsh, and it's just a blank square on it. But anyway... But it is interesting to know that we are still collecting data on things like religion and so on. Whereas, what purpose does it actually serve? I understand it's nice to be able to talk about it like this, but it does raise a more interesting and fundamental question of, well, who cares? At the end of the day, I think the ultimate end goal of me as a skeptic is for someone to just go, well, who cares? And just move on. And just go, yeah. Just shrug your shoulders and just go, yeah, okay. Just move on.
Emma.
Well, like I say, I think the censuses are cool, and I like big forms. And there are for Phoebe and fellow form skeptics, there is a lot of reason to collect that kind of data in terms of finding out whether minority groups, whether that be religion, ethnicity, etc., are disproportionately affected by income issues, housing issues, education, access, stuff like that. So there are reasons. Whether we use that to any net benefit,
we already collect this data in other forms.
Well, I think in terms of leaving the sort of supernatural side of things aside, because I think that's sort of a separate issue that is also kind of ingrained into our society. I do think that from an organizational perspective, the fewer people in Church of England and whatever, baptism, whatever floats their boat, I think the better. So I'm still taking this as a positive.
Yeah, divisive first segment there.